Okay, I think I'm on. Hello, everybody. Just decided I better do a quick video on it. I made a note on Facebook 5 minutes ago. I'll try to be brief on it, and this is what I refer to as update videos, which, I have to title them because I don't repost update videos, only teaching videos. But in short, um, you could say over these past 5 to 7 years, I do like to follow world events, news events, and history. I just caught a very good Netflix series. I watched 2 parts of it so far, or 1.5, but it's on World War II, which my position has always been Christians in general, the Western world, we should not, we should be careful that we don't glorify warfare as a sport. And 90-something% of the Christians in the Western world make that mistake, and I don't think they're aware of it. But this update is going to be on this. I wrote on it, I spoke on it many times over these last 5 to 7 years. And the update is this. Russia is going to invade Ukraine pretty soon. Now, this is not all of a sudden something happened. This is a development that's been going on for years now. And when the former Soviet Union collapsed and fell, most of us are familiar with it, the United States assured the satellite states that broke away. Russia maintained its Russia, but the other ones, Ukraine, Georgia, different ones, they kind of became their own independent, nation states, or however we want to refer to that. And so we assured Russia at that time that we would not try to get border states on the border of Russia into NATO and then start putting eventually, weapons and forces and so forth right on the border of Russia. Now, that's a very reasonable thing that Russia wanted assurances about, and that we told them we would never do that. We didn't put it in a treaty or in writing. And over the progression of time, the way our country operates, which is a disaster right now, people get lost in the entertainment mentality and everything else, and they follow the short news clips and sadly, we had a whole thing of the former president and the media demonizing Russia for all types of political reasons, which was not helpful. Well, Russia has been saying for a long time, and they had an emergency meeting last week. You might not have been familiar with it. And they contacted NATO. Vladimir Putin contacted NATO and said, this is an emergency meeting, and I'm going to do my last best effort to thwart. Basically, he didn't tell him, I don't think, we're going to invade Ukraine, but he basically put on the table what I just mentioned and said, now this has been coming for a long time, where we've been making this offer to the Western world and to NATO and the US that we're not going to invade any of Ukraine, but if you keep trying to allow them to become part of NATO and you keep pushing for that, meaning then you're going to have troops and weapons right on Russia's border, Russia has said reasonably that can't be accepted by us. Now, Putin also made the comment last week, because he's aware that we're not going to stop, and he's aware, in their country they put a national news service out in Russia last week telling everybody get ready for war. Now, see, I know you didn't hear that, most of you, but they basically just told the population, get ready, have gas masks and things prepared for war. Now, none of this is a bluff, because we have put them in that position. And what could have thwarted this? Because this could very well be World War III, the beginning of it. What could have stopped this is Mr. Biden and our country simply saying, we see your reasoning that you don't want opposition forces and weaponry right on your border, because we also didn't want that when Russia, I guess it was Nikita Khrushchev, but when Russia was put in, and we call that the Cuban Missile Crisis under John Kennedy, a great president, and we basically put a red line and said Russia was allied with Cuba and was going to have possibility of nuclear weapons in Cuba. And even though Cuba, I believe, is about 90 miles off the coast of U.S. Florida, we said we can't allow that, to the point we'll go to war over it. This is the exact position of Russia. And the reasonable view of people that look at all this is Russia is right and we're wrong on this. Now, Mr. Biden made a statement, and I still believe that he's not going to finish these 3 years. I made that video of the prophecy, I called it. I don't believe he's going to finish his 3 years. Either through, there was, right after I made that video, somebody made a comment on one of these platforms, because right after that, we had the Afghanistan debacle, okay? Which is one of the worst pullouts of U.S. troops from another country and the way it was handled than ever we had. And whether you're a Democrat or Republican, that's just reality. And because of where we're at now, I don't believe Mr. Biden, the Western world, the U.S. and NATO, but the U.S. is the biggest one that calls shots about NATO because we're the biggest NATO force out of all of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And so we're not going to change that. Mr. Biden had the chance, and if he sat down and made an independent decision, not by people that are behind the scenes that have certain viewpoints of how the world map should be, because it was redrawn, after World War II, the way things are and borders and so forth. So I'm going to do this and post it right now. It's short because I think that's coming right up. Now, it might be the next few weeks, but it's coming up. And I've spoken it before. And I felt like Mr. Biden, I said he's not going to finish 3 more years, whether it's a calamity or whatever. But I said I felt it had something to do with the war. And some people, right after that, you had the Afghanistan thing. And maybe some people thought it could be that, and it could have been, because he could have, had a resignation over that, the way that went. But it could be this one. Now, this is worth me at least speaking on, because I've spoken it before. I'll post this right now, and I would just say, you can hear all types of news stories from all types of sources and people and so forth. And what I just shared with you is not just some, whether you say a conservative or liberal or whatever. This is just the reality on the ground, that this has developed over these periods of years now. And so when Russia, just like I told you last week, had an emergency meeting, Vladimir Putin is making every attempt to say, because he knows, Biden made a statement that was not helpful. And this was, I heard him say it the last month or two, whenever it was. And he said, you got, anybody, Russia or anybody would be crazy because we can wipe people out, in so many words. And I thought that was a fatal mistake to say that, because Russia feels that they're in a corner on this. And any real analyst, strategic analyst, would say that he is right. And all we had to do in the West, or in the U.S., was to sit down and say, we're not going to try to get Ukraine into NATO or any other satellite state around your border, because we do understand that you, Mr. Putin, deem that as a threat. to the security of Russia itself. And our attitude was, nobody will mess with us. And that was wrong. Mr. Biden made a fatal flaw. And so I believe, though I wrote on this and talked about this over 7 years now, it's finally coming to pass at this point. And so it's significant in the sense that whether you're politically or whatever you are, this has to do with a war. This has to do with a war. And Mr. Biden initially said publicly, we're not going to defend Ukraine. We're just going to do sanctions. I thought that was interesting that he said it that way. And then they turned on that, and the official statement became, we're going to do it. And so last week, if you're not familiar, Russia once again, the second time in a year, moved 300,000 troops. Russia's right here on my wall map. But they moved 300,000 troops on the border of Russia and Ukraine. And NATO in the U.S. moved 40,000 troops on the other side in Ukraine. Then we thought it was going to happen right there. And then Russia pulled back maybe 100,000 out of that big force of 300, and they went back to their bases. And you could say, well, was that a bluff? It could have just simply been them watching where we were going to move our forces to. Okay? Meaning they're preparing for war, which is going to be a big war, and they wanted to see how many of our troops we were going to move and what bases they were going to go out of. So that's a serious thing. They're looking at it, and it wasn't just a bluff or whatever. They got that intelligence simply by NATO and the U.S. positioning those 40,000 troops, which I think are still in Ukraine. So but they're not hiding this. You know, they're not admitting they're going to invade it. They're not going to say it right up front. But they did not hide their intention that they cannot allow, for their own self-preservation, the United States and NATO to bring any border country in. And we should have listened. That's the reasonable thing. And so we pushed it. We pushed it this time because of our ignorance. And I'm no fan of Mr. Biden. But I'm not saying this is a Republican or a Democratic thing. When you go off on the mouth the way you did, for any president, and said, nobody, you'd be crazy to mess with us, we're the most powerful military. That's a show of arrogance after dramatic failure. And then to go on national media, you had people falling off planes trying to escape from Afghanistan after we withdrew, which was dismal. And then the nerve to go on and to say it was a great success, and to lie like that. And then the other thing that took place, and just came to my mind, I'll end this update. In response to that dismal failure, we killed kids. Mr. Biden is responsible for that. And what do you mean we killed kids? It looked so bad after that pullout. And then there was a bombing that took place at the airport that we used to control, and it's turned over to the Taliban, this Afghanistan. So we wanted to show force to find whoever bombed that airport as these evacuations were taking place. And we lied because we thought we targeted the correct white van or vehicle that was responsible for the bombing. And the U.S. government, military, and Biden himself, responsible for it, put out information that said, this was the van. We also saw explosives when we hit this van. But then people on the ground said, you just killed a man that was a aid worker and his kids. I don't know how many kids we killed. Now, the truth on the ground was we killed maybe a Christian man, but he was an aid worker with his family, his kids. And we blew them all to smithereens. That was our response right after the pullout. And then some questions arose. Is this true? And of course, the people on the ground knew it. The people living there knew it. And we lied. Biden and our generals said, nope, we got the right terrorists that, bombed that area. We lied. And we kept lying to the public. To you, to me, they lied to all of us until the New York Times, a liberal organization, investigated and began revealing what really happened, which is what I told you. So what did Mr. Biden and our military say when they knew they killed kids that day? They lied and had no intention on admitting that we killed a bunch of kids. That's nothing to ever glory over. That's nothing to ever say. And to make a statement after that disaster of killing those kids. If those kids were related to a key political figure in the U.S., there'd have been a war and an attack on anybody that did it. But because they were of a different descent, we took it like a joke. Because that's what we did. And I believe we just settled by paying money, because that's how that culture does operate. And if you take the life of people wrongfully, but kids we kill. And what's the final resolution on that, John? Mr. Schiff, Adam Schiff, he actually said, we're going to investigate and come to a conclusion. And they just said they're a bunch of kids, Arab or whatever you want to describe them, Muslim kids. And we just fluffed that off. Now you get blood on your hands for that. And now you're heading into a big decision that you messed up, and you're going to have your war. And that prophecy is going to come to pass. And it was Mr. Biden will not complete his term. And I'll tell you this, in my mind, I didn't mention this, and I'm going to just mention it as what came to my mind. I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if this was the first president that had to sign not a surrender agreement the way you would think it would be signed, but wouldn't it be amazing if this was the first president to have signed a loss, a huge military loss? And in this case it would be Russia. China has other things going on with Taiwan as well, and it would all be released at the same time, by the way. And so that would be a drastic way for that to come to pass, that this president would actually preside over a military loss. And Russia, when they shot down their satellite, if you're aware of it, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, without any warning to anybody, because they're getting ready for war, they shot down their own satellite. Well, why did they do it? They were testing their weapons to be able to shoot down U.S. satellites. And when they shot it down, some debris hit the space station, that there's a cooperative space station, Russian and U.S. and so forth. And what was our response? We're like, well, they need to be more careful. Look, that was a test. They also, you had the test of the hypersonic missile. I don't know if you were aware of, but so that it's just preparation. And it's not saber-rattling. They honestly feel that this is their survival. And this is not something that they've just been thinking about for the last year. This is a long term, many years now, that they said, we can't permit you to keep moving, these countries into NATO, putting forces, weapons right on Russia's border. We're going to see that as an act of war. They've been saying it, and we're just living in a dream bubble. Our media, our country, our president, we are in a dream bubble. And where's all the media, the liberal media? Where's your outrage over those kids we killed? If it was a Mr. Trump, or I don't care who it was, when we killed a bunch of kids and lied about it, and then after that said we are the most powerful military in the world, nobody should, after killing kids, I do not glory in our military. Our military people are good people, for the most part, but it's the decisions that people in authority make, and that take the lives of other innocent people, that I have a huge problem with. And I'm not a huge defender. I have a lot of Russian and Ukrainian friends, and I don't know where they stand politically on these issues. I just speak this as a real geopolitical reality on the ground. So I'll put this up right now because I could have made it last week, but you might not have been aware of a few details I just threw in. I found it interesting that I started a lot of these videos at the time of when Mr. Trump happened to be president, even walking past Trump Tower. But there's a lot that's going to take place. This year. And how we decide to tell Russia, in this instance, we're going to not stand for it and we're going to go to war with you, and they're ready. What should we do, John? If Mr. Biden was a humble man or had any intelligence, he could have sat down and looked at this. And there are liberals and conservatives. I heard liberal scholars, experts on Russia, 5-6 years ago. I forget his name. And he said the exact same thing I'm telling you. He said this is insanity that we're taking this position. And there's people that advise all U.S. presidents behind the scenes. And military people, they have ideas of things. The correct thing should have been, we understand. We'll keep our promise we made to Russia. And we're not going to try to get Ukraine or any of the adjoining former satellite. We lied. Again. And we killed those kids. Those kids were killed and that family was killed. And finally, our government admitted, I saw the general, whoever he was, it wasn't Milley, someone else, and he said it like out of, you called us. He admitted it like, well, and then they asked him, why did you lie about explosives that were going off when the U.S. was continuing to lie about the killing of those kids? The media said, you told us explosives went off in that van when you bombed it. And they still wouldn't admit we lied to you about that. They're no friend of the American people. Okay? That's just the update for today.